Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. When Nikki Halpin moved from Massachusetts to Florida with her husband Don and their two children, Max and Drew, she had plans to start a new life in a warmer climate. Their eldest son, Max, who was born in 1994, was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a condition whereby the baby has too much fluid on the brain. During one of his medical treatments, a member of staff had given him the wrong medication, which led to potentially detrimental side effects. Nikki and Don filed a lawsuit against the hospital, which took years to work its way through the legal system. The couple chose to settle in a place called Safety Harbor, a Florida town on the shores of Tampa Bay. Not long after, the couple separated. By the time the hospital agreed to a $1.5 million settlement to take care of Max's needs, they had already divorced. Nikki was listed as the sole guardian of this trust money. Despite the move not working out how they had originally planned, Nikki settled into life in this safe community. She was bubbly, outgoing and fun, and began enjoying her new lifestyle. She soon made lots of friends and also received a lot of attention from men in the area. 32-year-old Nikki had begun casually dating a man by the name of Chris Catunio, a 35-year-old computer technician. Chris was also originally from Massachusetts. On Thursday the 8th of January 2004, at around 9:30 p.m, Chris made a 911 call in which he told the dispatcher that they needed to get someone to Nikki's house on Clearwater in Safety Harbor immediately. Chris was calling from his mobile phone and was also on a call with Nikki on his landline. In that call he could hear a lot of noise and screaming, and it was clear that Nikki was being attacked. Pinellas County Deputy Brad Ferguson responded to the call and went to the address given to him by the dispatcher. When he arrived, the house was quiet, and when he spoke to the man who was living there, it was clear that he was at the wrong house. After speaking to the dispatcher again, it was confirmed that the address given was slightly wrong and the house in question was 2 doors away. Brad, accompanied by the neighbour from the original address, headed over there. The neighbour began calling Nikki's name, and shortly after 2 children appeared inside the house near a window. The policeman and the neighbour coaxed the children to unlock the front door. When they gained entry and asked where Nikki was, one of the children replied that she was in the back bedroom, adding that she was hurt. Brad went to investigate further. As he walked into the bedroom, he could see Nikki lying on the bed with blood coming from the left side of her head. It was clear that she had been violently attacked. He confirmed that she was still alive, but barely breathing, and an ambulance was called to rush Nikki to hospital, where she was placed in intensive care. The investigation into the attack was led by an 18-year veteran of the force, Detective Ed Judy. Both of the boys were traumatised. From analysing the crime scene, it could be seen that Max had been playing a video game in his mother's bedroom at the time of the attack. He had blood spots on his shirt, and it was estimated that he had been sitting less than 3 feet away from his mother when she was attacked. Due to his medical condition and shock, he was unable to speak or describe what he had seen. 6-year-old Drew told the police that they had been out for pizza with his mum's boyfriend Chris that evening. They had dropped Chris off and then returned home. Drew was in the living room doing some homework when he heard his mum scream and saw her running from the spare bedroom to her own bedroom with a man chasing her. Drew described the man as being dressed in black with a mask on and a baseball bat in his hand. The boys had run and hid in the bathtub to get away from the attacker. 1,500 miles away in Massachusetts, a police officer arrived on the doorstep of Nikki's parents' house to tell them that their daughter had been attacked and that she was fighting for her life in intensive care. Her father, Nelson, and mother, Laurie, got on a flight as soon as they possibly could and headed straight to the hospital. By this time it had been established that Nikki was brain dead and was being kept alive by a respirator. They then had to say goodbye to their daughter and make the agonising decision to cease life support. Nikki died in hospital 4 days after the attack. A search of the house was long and painful and did not return anything of evidentiary value. However, the police believe that the perpetrator was known to Nikki. They wore a mask so as not to be identified by her 2 sons. There was nothing stolen from the house, and there appeared to be a lack of motive. The up-close and violent nature of the attack hinted at an emotional connection to Nikki. The police started by interviewing her boyfriend Chris, wanting to know more about his whereabouts at the time of the murder. They also wanted to check the status of his relationship with Nikki. Chris had provided them with the incorrect address during the 911 call, and whilst the couple had their fair share of arguments, Nikki's friends believed that he really liked her and wanted them to be exclusive. When Chris was approached, he gave the detectives full access to his home, laptop and phones and cooperated fully with the inquiry. Phone records proved that he was at home as stated at the time of the murder. He was ruled out of the inquiry, but went on to provide more details about the evening of the murder. As previously established, he had gone to dinner with Nikki and her children. They had done a bit of shopping before Nikki dropped Chris back to his home. When Chris went inside, he opened his laptop and received a message from Nikki, which simply said HB. He replied to the message asking how she had got home so fast, and a few minutes later received a second message. Nikki said that she had not written the first message and then called Chris asking him to stay on the phone line with her whilst she checked her house. She was concerned that someone had broken in. At this point, all hell broke loose. Chris could hear Nikki being attacked, kept that line open whilst grabbing his mobile phone and calling 911. Further investigation led to many possible suspects. People seemed to be drawn to Nikki's outgoing and friendly personality. She liked to socialise and also spent time in various chat rooms on the internet. The list of suspects kept growing. Various people were investigated and ruled out of having any involvement in her death. The police also began to look at Nikki's past. Her ex-husband, Don, came under scrutiny. Nikki's family had never liked him, and her mother believed that Don was involved in her daughter's death. Don was almost 20 years older than Nikki. He had been married several times before marrying Nikki when she was 20 years old. He was an ex-boxer and former prison guard who was now a bartender. One of Nikki's closest friends said that she suspected Don because he was the most aggressive person that she had ever met. If Nikki died, the guardianship of Max's trust fund would revert to Don as the remaining biological parent, giving him a strong motive. The police asked Don to take a polygraph test. When asked if he knew who had murdered Nikki, the polygraph indicated deception in his answer. How could he know who killed her unless he himself was the killer? Further investigation revealed that he had an airtight alibi. He was at work at the time of the attack, which could be proved by both video surveillance and co-workers' testimony. He was not the killer, so why did he fail the polygraph? Don then told the police that the person that he thought was responsible for the murder was the same one that he blamed for the breakdown of his marriage. A man by the name of Daniel Welch. Nikki and Daniel had started dating shortly after she had separated from Don. Her parents and friends believed that he was the perfect antidote to her former husband. Daniel was quiet, patient, and never raised his voice. He seemed to really care for Nikki and her 2 children. The children also adored him. The pair had dated for around 2 years, and whilst initially Nikki was very serious about him, the longer that she spent with him, the more uncertain she felt. By the time that Daniel was ready to commit to her, it was too late. She had seen a side of him that she didn't like and was becoming increasingly concerned that he had too much interest in the trust fund money. Don told detectives that Daniel had been haunting and stalking Nikki in the weeks before her death, but he clearly hated Daniel and was far from objective, so could his opinion really carry much weight? The police continued to investigate. Nikki had called things off with Daniel in September 2003, and whilst at first the breakup seemed uneventful, Daniel's behaviour soon began to change and escalate. Daniel would often turn up at Nikki's house, banging on her doors and windows to let him in. Nikki's friend encouraged her to get a restraining order, but she did not want to do so as she believed it would ruin Daniel's life. Nikki decided to get an alarm system put into her house, but never got around to doing it. When the detectives arrived at Daniel's house, they said that they wanted to talk to him about Nikki. He shook his head, not knowing what they meant. The police clarified, "Your ex-girlfriend Nikki," to which he replied, "Oh, you mean Nicole? I've been expecting you guys." Daniel invited them in and was very cooperative. He allowed them to look around before asking him any questions. Both detectives noticed a large 5-battery silver torch on the table. Nikki's son, Drew, mentioned that her attacker had been carrying a silver baseball bat. Could it actually have been this torch? After all, Drew was only 6 years old and in a highly stressful situation. Daniel began acting suspiciously. He saw the officers looking at the torch and passed it to them, telling them to take it, as he knew they wanted it. At that point, no mention of either how or with what Nikki had been attacked had been made public knowledge. While the police were still present, Daniel made a call to his then-girlfriend. He told her that he was now the prime suspect, that the kids had not been physically hurt in the attack, that Nikki had neither been robbed nor sexually assaulted, and that her head had been bashed in. None of this information had been released to the media. He was telling his girlfriend things that only law enforcement or the attacker would know. The police asked where he was the night of the murder. He said that he had ordered Chinese food to his house and that after dinner he had gone cycling and jogging with a neighbour who was training for a marathon, before finally returning home to bed. When the authorities checked this alibi, the neighbour said that whilst Daniel had been with him that evening, he had left early, around 9 p.m, stating that he wasn't feeling well. Daniel was asked to the police station to complete a polygraph test. He scored -19, a score that the examiner said showed unbelievable levels of deception. Whilst the police believed that they had Nikki's killer, they lacked the hard evidence needed to prove this in court. Months passed without any further developments, and then a breakthrough came from an unusual source. A civil servant in the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, Genevieve Myers, had the job of transcribing various documents, including police interviews, dispatches, wiretaps, and 911 calls. She had spent many hours transcribing everything to do with the case, including interviews and phone calls with Daniel. After doing this, she was then given the job of transcribing the 911 call that had been made by Chris. In this recording, it had also picked up the audio from the second phone call that Chris had opened, which provided the audio of Nikki's murder. In it, the killer could be heard saying, "Nicole, calm down." When she heard this, Genevieve knew that the voice belonged to Daniel. After spending hours transcribing tapes from his interviews, she immediately recognised his voice. In addition, of all of Nikki's friends and relatives, he was the only one who called her Nicole. But would this be enough to convince a jury? The tapes were sent off to isolate and enhance the voice, and when this was played to Nikki's parents, they were 95% certain that the voice belonged to Daniel. Detective Ed Judy then received a request from Daniel's sister to listen to the recording. Whilst he doubted her impartiality, he saw no reason not to do this. She positively identified her brother's voice. At around this time, Daniel, who at that point had no criminal record, was arrested for selling prescription medication and was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. In January 2006, after a 2-year investigation involving over 1,000 police hours, 150 interviews, and 260 reports, Daniel was charged with Nikki's murder. In May 2007, he agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in return for a 25-year sentence. Despite wanting him to be imprisoned for life, the family agreed to this to save Nikki's 2 young boys the ordeal of testifying. The 25-year sentence was scheduled to begin once his current sentence ended in January 2009. Even though he admitted the crime as part of the plea deal, after the hearing he protested his innocence, claiming that he only pleaded guilty, knowing that the prosecution had a strong case against him, and because he did not want the boys to have to testify, adding that he had great affection for them. Daniel will be eligible for parole in 2028. Thank you for listening to today's case. Please subscribe if you're new to the channel and add any comments down below. Unfortunately, this week I've run out of time for petty crime, but hopefully there should be some next week. Thank you for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. Out of all the sorrow of this awful story, I found an article that says Nikki's organs were donated to aid the lives of 11 people according to her family members. It's amazing that they could help others in this way. Goodbye.